Well, hello listeners, and welcome to this special Astro Radio program where Daz and I will be looking at the UK space program. How are you, Daz?
I'm fine, thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this. It's been quite a while in the making, but of course, when we were thinking about recording it, everything in the world changed around a little bit. So we've had other things on our mind. So I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
Indeed so. I think you'd agree with me, Daz, that when we look at the British space program, the vast majority of people in the country probably don't even realise that there is a space program.
No, and they probably also didn't realise we had one before.
Absolutely. And equally, I don't think many people know how far along the UK space program is and how it's literally going to take off starting this year. When Britain will become the first European country to launch a satellite from its own soil. And that's quite a distinction. And that's historic. So in this program, we're going to be looking at the history of the UK in space and what the plans are for the future. And we'll be talking to some interesting people as well along the way. But to start us off today, Daz has very kindly put together a brief history of the UK space program.
As has already been mentioned in the introduction, today we are going to discuss the British space industry as it stands today. But I thought it would help us to understand better how we got to today by having a quick preamble through Britain's historic involvement in space. So here goes. Rockets have been around for hundreds of years, since the Chinese had invented gunpowder, or as it was also known, black powder. Their rockets were for entertainment, but some had other ideas about their use, mostly military. Even the Duke of Wellington had rocket batteries at the Battle of Waterloo, which were used against Napoleon. But others dreamed of using them to travel in the sky, and even some dreamed of travelling amongst the stars. Some were content just to write their dreams down in sci-fi novels, while others worked to make these dreams a reality. The British Interplanetary Society, or BIS, was founded in Liverpool in 1933 by Philip E. Cleator. It is the oldest existing space advocacy organisation in the world. Its aim is exclusively to support and promote astronautics and space exploration. I just mentioned that the British Interplanetary Society is the oldest advocacy of space in the world. I think I must clarify that. The British Interplanetary Society was only preceded in aeronautics by the Soviet Society for Studies of Interplanetary Travel, founded in 1924, the German VFR, founded in 1927, and by the American Interplanetary Society, founded in 1930. But, unlike those, the BIS has never been absorbed into a national industry. Thus it is now the world's oldest existing space advocacy body. When originally formed in October 1933, the BIS aimed not only to promote and raise the public profile of astronautics, but also to undertake practical experimentation into rocketry along similar lines to the organisations above. However, early in 1936 the Society discovered that this ambition was thwarted by the Explosives Act of 1875, which prevented any private testing of liquid fuel rockets in the United Kingdom. In the late 1930s, the group devised a project of landing people on the moon by a multi-stage rocket, each stage of which would have many narrow solid fuel rockets. Their lander was gumdrop shaped, but otherwise quite like the Lunar module. As it was considered that the cabin would have to rotate, BIS member Ralph A. Smith, who helped re-establish the Society post-World War II, invented the first instrument for space travel, the coalestat, a navigation mechanism that would ingeniously cancel out the rotating view. R.A. Smith and Harry Ross were the aerospace visionaries named on the original patent. Smith also authored and illustrated the 1947 book The Exploration of the Moon, showing the first ever conceptual orbital satellite text by Arthur C. Clarke, which is said to have inspired both J.F. Kennedy and Stanley Kubrick. Toward the end of World War II, the British military, as well as all the other allies, scrambled to gather German rocket scientists, technical data, parts and even V-2 rockets themselves to help develop their own rocket developments. The British Operation Backfire involved firing V-2 rockets from Cuxhaven across the North Sea. In 1946, the British Interplanetary Society started a program known as Megarock. The purpose of the program was to develop a suborbital spaceflight that could provide manned ascents to a maximum of 1 million feet or 304 kilometers. The craft was made by enlarging and redesigning a V-2 rocket after it was noted by H.E. Ross in 1946 that the V-2 rocket was nearly big enough to carry a man. The project was noted to be 10 years ahead of its time by NASA engineers who reviewed it. The same NASA engineers predicted the rocket would have been capable of first achieving a manned suborbital flight between 1949 and 1951, and capable of sending people to space reliably by 1951. So possibly a mischance there. During the Second International Astronautical Congress, held in London in 1951, the BIS was one of 13 national space societies who together founded the International Astronautical Federation. The other 13 members no longer exist as national societies, leaving only the BIS. Other British Interplanetary Society projects include 1978. They published a starship study called Project Daedalus, an unmanned interstellar flyby of Barnard's star, using a craft utilizing nuclear pulse engines. 2003 to 2006, Project Borealis was a project to design a manned Martian North Pole station. 2009 and ongoing, Project Icarus, resurrection in part of Daedalus, a nuclear-powered interstellar space travel craft. Today they have interest in Skylon, the European reusable single-stage spaceplane. The BIS membership included Arthur C. Clarke, who was a sci-fi writer and conceiver of geostationary telecommunications satellites, and was also one-time chairman. Archibald Montgomery Low, who in 1976 was included in the 35 pioneers listed by the International Academy of Astronautics and inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame in 1976. He has been called the father of radio guidance systems and the founder of the field of radio guidance systems. Alternatively, it is suggested A.M. Low was the father of remotely piloted vehicles. Another sci-fi writer was Charles Chilton, who joined the Society before writing and producing the science fiction radio trilogy Journey into Space. In 1952, the first official space program began, and in 1959 the first satellite program started with the aerial series of British satellites. The Aerial Satellite Project was a collaboration between the USA and the UK. The UK provided all the scientific instrumentation that went onto the satellite, while the USA provided the structure that would carry the instrumentation and also launched it on a Thor Delta IX rocket. Ariel 1 was launched in the USA in April 1962 and worked flawlessly, sending back data regarding space weather. Ariel 1 was among several satellites inadvertently damaged or destroyed by the Starfish Prime high-altitude nuclear test on July 9, 1962, conducted by the US Air Force, and its subsequent radiation belt. Its solar panels sustained damage from irradiation, affecting Ariel 1's operations. The satellite operated even after the nuclear test, sending back sporadic and sometimes unintelligible data, but occasionally with some data that could be used. The radiation disabled the timer that would have deactivated the satellite after 1 year. effectively extending the satellite's life. It decayed from orbit on the 24th of May 1976. 5 more aerial satellites were sent into orbit. The day after the nuclear test, the USA launched the UK-designed Telstar TV satellite up into the same radiation belt, and it is thought it was the reason why it only lasted a few months. But again, that worked flawlessly at first, with Telstar broadcasting its first television images across the Atlantic Ocean, and were received at Goonhilly Downs in Cornwall, the UK. In 1971, the last Black Arrow R3 rocket launched Prospero X-3, the only British satellite to be launched using a British rocket. Ground contact with Prospero ended in 1996. There was also military satellites. Skynet is a purely military program, operating a set of communication satellites on behalf of the Ministry of Defence to provide communication services to the 3 branches of the British Armed Forces, and to NATO and Allied governments. The first satellite was launched in 1969, becoming the first military satellite in geostationary orbit, and the most recent in 2012. As of 2020, 7 Skynet satellites are operating and providing coverage of almost the whole globe. Skynet is the most expensive British space project, although as a military initiative it is not part of the civil space programme. The MOD is currently specifying the Skynet 6 architecture to replace the Skynet 5 model satellites, which is expected to cost around £6 billion. Of course, everybody else knows Skynet from the Terminator films. A bit ominous, don't you think? Zircon was the code name for a British signals intelligence satellite intended to be launched in 1988 before being cancelled. It was supposed to be launched from the Space Shuttle, and also would have involved British military personnel being trained as astronauts for the launch. But this was scrapped in 1987 before the launch, and probably another opportunity missed to get the British astronauts into space early. To this day, Britain is the only country to have developed its own satellite and launch system and then abandon it. Possibly another missed opportunity. Since the end of the Second World War, the West, as it became known, was engaged in a Cold War with Russia, and this deepened in the 50s and the 60s. So as well as satellite programs, the British also engaged in rocketry, both civil and military. From the mid-1950s to the 1970s, Britain had its own rocket program. I'm not going to go into full detail about all the rockets that the British space industry developed, but here is just the highlights. The Skylark rocket, designed in 1955 and first launched in 1957. It was basically a sounding rocket. A sounding rocket is a rocket that you can attach scientific instruments to and send into suborbital space. It can also be used to test instruments that will later be developed and used on the larger rockets. During the 1960s, Skylark evolved into an excellent platform for space astronomy, with its ability to point at the sun, moon or stars. It was used to obtain the first good quality X-ray images of the solar corona. It had a long and distinguished career, with its last launch being in 2005. Next came the Black Knight and the Blue Streak. The Black Knight was basically a smaller version of the Blue Streak and was a testbed for the larger rocket. The Blue Streak was to be Britain's intermediate ballistic missile to deliver nuclear payloads. These also developed into the Black Arrow, which was a satellite launch system, and as I said before, in 1971 successfully launched Britain's only British manufactured satellite, Prospero, before being cancelled. And again, I'll reiterate, Britain is the only country to develop its own launch system and then cancel it. With the cancellation of the above projects, but there still being plenty of equipment lying around, Black Prince was devised by Desmond King and Doreen Gilmore at the Royal Aircraft Establishment Designers. But again, this was cancelled before it came to fruition. With Black Prince cancelled, Blue Streak and Black Knight parts were used for the first and second stages for the European Europa satellite system. Before that was cancelled also. All the rockets mentioned were tested at Highdown in the Isle of Wight and at RAF Speedham in Cumbria, with all the rockets also being tested and launched in Woomera in South Australia. But with the cancellation of all these rockets, it wasn't the end of British involvement in rocketry. Between 1969 and 1979, Falstaff was a British hypersonic test rocket, and again was launched from Woomera. Also, what has to be mentioned, in 1960 the British Space Development Company, a consortium of 13 large industrial companies, was set up by Robert Renwick, the first Baron of Renwick, to plan the world's first commercial communications satellite company. With Blue Streak, Britain had the technology to make it possible, but the idea was rejected by the British government on the grounds that such a system could not be envisaged in the next 20 years, between 1961 and 81. The United States set up COSMAT in 1963, resulting in Intelsat, a large fleet of commercial satellites. The first of Intelsat's fleet, Intelsat 1 Early Bird, was launched in April 1965. In the mid-1980s, Britain was the only main Western country not to have one. Another opportunity missed. The official National Space Programme was revived in 1982 when the British government funded the Horizontal Takeoff and Landing, HOTOL, which is HOTOL project, an ambitious attempt at a reusable spaceplane using air-breathing rocket engines designed by Alan Bond. Work was begun by British Aerospace. However, having classified the engine design as top secret, the government then ended funding for the project, terminating it. This project would be later revived as the Skylon project, as mentioned earlier. In 1985, the British National Space Centre was founded and was based in Swindon, UK. The British National Space Centre was the third major contributor to the ESA at the time, but also worked with the USA and other space industries. Nearly all space probes and satellites have British technology or support systems involved. On the 1st of April 2010, the British National Space Centre was replaced by the UK Space Agency, which basically brings us up to date. And now we can talk about the British space industry of today.
Well, thank you, Daz, for that. That was great. And as I think you said, it's a real shame that Britain became the first country in history to develop the capability of launching satellites and then cancel it again.
Yes, it's an honour we still hold, unfortunately.
Yes, but all that is about to change. Now, while Daz and I have been preparing this program, there's a load of documentation that has been published by the British government, and in particular the UK Space Agency, relating to the plans for space. And we think they're exciting, so we'd like to share them with you. So what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to go through the 10-point plan that UK Space has put together about the aims and ambitions for the future. So let's do this together, Les. I'll start us off, and then you can do the next one. So the 10-point plan focuses on 10 strategic areas for UK Space, and the first one is that Britain wants to capture the European market in commercial small satellite launch. Now, obviously, there are quite a few companies around the world launching in this lucrative small satellite market, because we have to remember that satellites, as the years go by, are getting smaller and smaller. There isn't the requirement anymore to launch massive, huge satellites weighing, a lot. The trend is very much towards small satellites, microsatellites, CubeSats, and Britain wants to become the leading European player in launching these small satellites. So the first point that the UK Space Agency wants to put together is this. The UK will achieve the first small satellite launch from Europe in 2022. That's this year, obviously, with the aim of becoming the leading provider of commercial small satellite launch in Europe by the year 2030. The government is investing to develop spaceports across locations in England, Scotland, and Wales, laying the groundwork for end-to-end UK services building, launching and operating small satellites, and working closely with industry to implement modern regulations and create favourable conditions for launch. So that's quite an ambition, isn't it, Daz?
It certainly is. And with, as you said, this year, we hope to have at least 2 launches, one vertical and one horizontal. But we'll talk about those later on.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, let's just briefly mention what you mean by vertical and horizontal, though.
Right. So, a vertical takeoff is what you usually see from the NASA sites. It's a rocket that will actually go straight up into the sky. It's vertical when it starts, except for the Astro rocket that went sideways, which was a bit amusing. Yes. But they just take straight off up into the sky. And off they go. A horizontal flight is launch is where it is originally the rocket is underslung. It can be underneath a balloon or a 747 underneath the wing. It will be taken up into the atmosphere, and basically it will be launched from there. It will be dropped from the plane. It will fire its rockets and then launch itself up into space. It cuts out most of the fuel that you'll need to punch through the atmosphere, but that's what the difference is.
Absolutely. And just while we're on that subject, the leading player in this at the moment is Virgin Orbit.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, what about point number 2 on this 10-point
point number 2, of course, one of the biggest problems we've got at the moment on this planet is climate. And number 2 is fight climate change with space technology. And it says, I can't put it no better than what they've actually said. It said the UK will not reach its goal of net zero emissions by 2050 without a clear understanding of how climate change is impacting the Earth to guide crucial decision makings and investments. We will strive to remain at the forefront of Earth observations technology and know-how, including participating in Copernicus, the world's leading global Earth observation programs, and working with partners in ESA, which is the European Space Agency, and the Truth's mission to deliver a 10-fold improvement in accuracy. So I think they say clearly themselves, without us knowing what's actually happening, we've got to adjust ourselves accordingly. And if we don't know what's happening, then we can't see it. So we need the technology. And the British hope to, and us, the Brits, hope to be in the forefront of all this.
Absolutely. And Copernicus is the European program for extremely sophisticated state-of-the-art Earth observation satellites, and Britain will be participating in that. And as it says, we need more accurate data to fully measure and understand what's going on the Earth. So that's a very worthwhile goal to set for UK space. Point 3 in the UK Space Agency's 10-point plan is to unleash innovation across the space sector. And it says our UK innovation strategy identifies the priority technologies that will drive innovation and growth in the space sector, from robotics and smart machines, advanced materials and manufacturing, to artificial intelligence, digital and advanced computing. This includes strengthening the pull-through of innovation into commercial opportunities to expand UK exports, intellectual property, and know-how. For example, we will build on the success of the National Space Innovation Programme to encourage the development of cutting-edge space products. Now, this talks about innovation in the private sector, obviously, and it's worth stating that according to the most recent figures we could find, that currently the UK space industry is worth, was it 16 billion a year to the UK economy, with the latest figure we could find, which was 2019, wasn't it? Something like that.
Yeah, it was. It's a hell of a lot.
So 16 billion it's projected to double before 2030. So the UK space industry is making a major contribution to the British economy, and that will only continue to grow. And this is where the expertise is, of course. It's not as if Britain is building a space agency on the lines of NASA. They really want to allow businesses to thrive, to develop innovative technologies with everything that was listed in that point for the future. And it's not clear exactly how that's going to happen. But again, it's a worthwhile goal because, as we know, innovation comes from the private sector, not from the public sector.
So exactly. Because as I spoke in my little potted history at the beginning, we had a space industry. And although we stopped actually developing the rockets to launch our own systems, we never stopped working in the background on a lot of the very big probes, satellites, and everything else that went up into space. There was some British or European components on everything that went up. So we've always been in the forefront, but we haven't been blowing our trumpet. That's the thing. No, absolutely. And Britain, if you like, is a bit of an unsung hero in the space industry because we have, constantly over the decades been refining our expertise in particularly satellites, but also breaking new ground all the time in all sorts of space technologies, because the UK Space Agency, as it is, was not actually founded that long ago. And before then, I think the industry had been the sort of dribs and drabs, and nothing was coordinated, nothing was centralized. There were no overall, 10-point plans like this one. So it's good to see that companies will be able to contribute to the space program and use their expertise, because after all, Britain has a very long history of particularly engineering innovation. So that's good to see. So what about point 4? What have we got for point 4? Point 4 is along the sort of like the same lines as point 3. It says, expand our horizons with space science and exploration. It says, we will put space at the heart of our ambition to lead the world as a science and technology superpower. The UK's national programme of space science and exploration will better focus on UK strengths and priorities, and we will strengthen bilateral relationships with established and emerging space nations to maximise benefits on shared objectives. Missions such as the US-led Artemis programme open the door for greater UK involvement in human spaceflight and provide opportunities for UK companies to innovate and develop future manufacturing capabilities. As it said, it mentions there Artemis. We've formed lots of alliances with several countries now. We still work with ESA, even though we've come out of the European community. And we have done. We've never stopped working with them. We've signed up to the Artemis Accords, which of course is the US or the NASA-run project to put human beings back onto the moon and later Mars. We've also signed up with Australia, Japan, lots of different space agencies. So we're actually spreading ourselves throughout the world, and we're full of cooperation. We just want to help in any way we can because things need to be changing.
Absolutely. And I think, even since this document was written, with the awful war in Ukraine effectively freezing Russia out of international cooperation, there will be new alliances, and strengthening of existing alliances. For example, the space bridge, as it's called, with Australia, that's very, very interesting. And it's kind of ironic in a way that we're rebuilding that, because of course British rockets used to be launched from Woomera in Australia back in the 60s. So now we're getting together with Australia again, and Australia is emerging as a nation of incredible innovation. For example, part of the or half of the Square Kilometre Array, the world's biggest most incredibly powerful radio telescope is being built in Western Australia. So Australia is a very forward-looking nation when it comes to technology and discovery. And the other thing about that is with Artemis, well, Artemis, as we know, Daz, only too well, it's got its problems. It's got huge problems. As it stands at the moment, the Artemis program is not sustainable. But it doesn't really matter from Britain's point of view, because it's opening doors for the UK. It's a chance for the UK to get its foot in the door and say, hey, look what we can do. We can help with this. So that's great. And then number 5, develop our world-class space clusters. Now, what do they mean by that? It says that the government will work with the space sector to support, connect, and level up locally led space ecosystems across the UK, capitalising upon sector expertise from Cornwall to the Shetland Islands, Durham to Newport, and Portsmouth to Belfast. We will link local clusters into valuable networks of innovators and investors, showcasing the strengths of the UK space sector and leveraging the Hanwell cluster in the Oxford-Cambridge arc to provide a compelling front door to international investors in the heart of the UK's leading space business hub. Now, that I think needs a bit of unpicking, because it's a bit of government gobbledygook, to be quite honest. So basically, do you know what the hell they're talking about, Daz?
Well, when you look at the plan and you look at a map of the UK, and then you put all the points together of where there are space industries working at the moment, there is a massive bias towards the southeast
right.
of the UK. So to get to the leveling up, so everyone is encouraged to participate and get the benefits from being part of the space industry, they decided to have what they call space clusters, space hubs, and space centers.
Right.
Now, and that's as well as the spaceports where these things will be taking off. And basically, they're centers of where groups, the local community, the local authorities can bring together all the technology, all the research, all the actual building of these instruments, of the satellites themselves, into sort of like pulling it all together. Also to be doing outreach to promote space and things like that. But they're all slightly different handles. They all got different things. The space hubs are going to be hubs of space.
Right.
It's basically, they hope to cluster manufacturers and other space technologies in one area, like Harwell. You mentioned Harwell.
Yes, indeed.
Portsmouth is another one. And the Cornwall, the spaceport in Cornwall,
Newquay,
in Newquay, that'll be another hub and a space center. So the hubs will be actual collections of space industry all in one place, so they'll be local in the actual area. Then you've got the space centers and the space hubs, which will be promoting the space centers and clusters, which will be promoting and also organizing and pulling together everybody, so they're all working in the space industry. They're not all floundering around doing their own things and all that. It can all be pulled together, and people can come along, say, look, we've got this technology, where can we put it? And they will put you onto it and stuff like that. And also education.
Right. Well, I mean, this sounds like a wizard wheeze, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds really, really forward-looking, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And it's not just talk. They've actually put millions of pounds into all these hubs, these space centers, these spaceports. So money is being put into this. It's not just bluster and talk and all that sort of thing. They're actually actively taking a part and financing or helping to finance all these regions. And as I said, the leveling up is just to make sure that everybody in the country, because these space centers and hubs are spread all over the country, Scotland, Ireland, and places like that, and they will all be encouraging people to take part and basically experience the gains of actually being part of it.
Fantastic. That's really great. Okay, the next point, number 6. What we're doing at the moment, we're going through the 10-point plan that the British government have put together, outlining their vision for the UK in space. And we've got as far as point 6, which is lead the global effort to make space more sustainable. And it says, and I quote, "We will build on UK early advantage in robotics and in-orbit servicing and manufacturing to establish global leadership in space sustainability. This includes positioning the UK at the forefront of modern regulation for novel space activities while keeping space sustainable, safe, and secure. The UK is leading efforts at the UN to promote safe space operations that will benefit all. We will explore advanced in-orbit debris removal, servicing, refueling, and assembly technologies, bringing together industry, academia, and government to ensure the UK is ready to grasp the opportunities of the future space economy." Now, this one is quite interesting because, as we know, there is a huge problem with space debris in low Earth orbit. And if we don't do something about it pretty damn quick, then low Earth orbit could be shut off to us forever, essentially, because there is an enormous amount of objects that are in low Earth orbit left over from rocket launches, from destroyed satellites. Ask Vladimir Putin about that. And all sorts of other junk that's just floating about in space. And that's just the stuff that can be tracked. I think they can track down to objects down to, I think, a size of 12 centimeters. Mm-hmm. Anything smaller than that is invisible. And we know there's a lot of it. Even a fleck of paint hitting, for example, the windscreen of the space shuttle can punch a hole in it, as actually happened. Well, nearly punched a hole in it. It was a pretty big crater anyway, and it was just a fleck of paint traveling, of course, at 17,500 miles an hour. Not many people know that the UK is emerging as the world leader in cleaning up low Earth orbit, in actually removing this debris. And what exactly is the UK doing in that respect, Daz?
Again, this year alone, as I said, the government are putting money in, not just to the spaceports, the space hubs, the big flowery things, but they're also putting them into private industry who are developing these systems. And in January, they issued grants of millions of pounds. It was millions of pounds, which doesn't sound a lot. But for these small companies, it is a lot. It's a lifeline, and it's going to help them immensely.
Sure.
But of the 13, 11 were to do with, as Andy said, space debris, detection of space debris, monitoring space debris, removal of space debris, and there also was mentioned the servicing and repair of old technology that's already up there. If somebody wants to extend the life of their satellite, we'll pop something up there and it can be refueled. So all these things will be robotic probes that will go up and basically give it a once over and give it a service, give it an MOT. As regards space debris, there have already been tests of different methods of catching and removing and deorbiting space debris.
Right.
They haven't actually removed any satellites as such at the moment, but they sent up and they had a target and they used different methods. One was a net, one was a harpoon that it fired. Quite a big, powerful thing, actually, it was.
It worked amazingly well as well.
Yeah, where it's right on target.
Right on target.
And so we are, as Andy said, leading in the efforts to make space safer or low Earth orbit safer by the removing and tracking of all these pieces of space debris, which are causing a major problem, and they will possibly it's only going to get worse at the moment. So,
and the fact that looking at this point, the government is talking in terms of keeping space sustainable. So I think we can assume that British companies launching rockets from the UK, these will be reusable rockets. Almost certainly. Maybe not initially, but...
Not initially, but no. I mean, that is the way to go.
Yes.
Because there are advantages of having reusable rockets, because it lowers the price for a start. You haven't got to go and completely rebuild a new rocket.
That's right.
I think there are some of the plans are for when these things do splash down, or if they don't burn up in the higher atmosphere, will splash down, will be retrieved. They won't be left to sink to the bottom of the sea, or create any sort of hazard. So there are systems and plans to recover any sections, but they'll probably be, to begin with, they will probably be scrapped. But you say about reusable, when we get on to later on, when we start talking about the spaceports, there is plans to have a sort of like small space shuttle type aircraft, which will be launched probably from a horizontal launch system.
Right.
It will fly up into space, do what it's got to do, and it will return and land at one of these spaceports, because most of them have got runways.
So this would be something like Sierra's Dream Chaser, then, presumably.
Something like that, yes.
Something like that. Okay, that's great. Okay, what do we got for point 7?
Point 7 is public services with space technology. We will improve key public services spanning healthcare, the environment, transportation, and infrastructure by identifying where space-enabled applications already available on the market could improve lives and reduce costs for the taxpayer. The potential real-world benefits are numerous and diverse, from satellite-enabled NHS drones to turning around test results in remote areas faster, to space-enabled sensors and tracking that detects problems in critical infrastructure before they cause outages. We will pilot new delivery with the possibility of rolling out to other UK locations throughout the decade. Basically, because one of the things that they're putting money into is it's an atomic clock system, where basically everything will not rely upon satellite timing. We will have our own timing systems, and things like transport, and infrastructure will all be on the same time. We won't be relying upon satellites.
Oh, that's pretty good, because as we know, Europe has built its own satellite navigation system called Galileo, and unfortunately Britain was excluded from that because of Brexit, although as the Europeans say, Britain was then invited to negotiate to get back in, but Britain didn't want to negotiate with the Europeans, funnily enough. So Britain is left without a system. GPS is getting long in the tooth. It's not incredibly accurate. It's only accurate to a few meters, whereas modern technology often requires more accurate positioning than that. So that's really good to hear that we're building. Well, the UK is building its own system. I'm not quite sure what satellite-enabled NHS drones are. That's
I think what they're talking. I think what they're talking about there is your well, I suppose deliveries. I don't know. It could be transporting blood.
Something like that.
Organs, but also it could be extended to cover the world, and you can fly medical supplies into areas of disaster and things like that.
War, indeed.
Or war, exactly. Yes. I don't know whether that's going to be extended, but I think that because they're also talking about that there'll be monitoring systems which can detect any problems before they actually cause outages, as they put it. So any system that's possibly going to go down, and detect. Because I think Wales are sending up one satellite, which is infrared satellite, and it'll be detecting buildings with poor insulation and things like that.
Yes, that's right. I was reading about that not long ago. Yeah. Absolutely, it's all very exciting stuff, isn't it?
It is. It's and like I said, it's not all waffle and things that they're sort of like picking up. They are actually investing in this, so it's nice.
Yeah.
So what about number 8, Andy?
Right, number 8. Right, what have we got here for number 8? Number 8 is deliver the UK Defence Space Portfolio. Having established Space Command, we will launch a National Space Operations Centre fusing civil and defence expertise to monitor, protect, defend and promote UK interests in space. We will launch the UK's first defence space portfolio to be detailed in the Defence Space Strategy, developing independent space domain awareness capabilities to protect UK satellites and advancing our secure satellite communications program, Skynet. We will develop a small constellation of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites and explore other new initiatives to protect and defend the UK, pulling through advanced technologies from research and development to operation and exploring opportunities for dual civil and defence use. Now, this is hardly surprising. On the back of the UK setting up their Space Force to protect US interests in space, I'm sure Britain will not be the last country to think of doing something similar, because space is becoming of immense strategic and military importance. We wish it were otherwise. We wish that, we could use space for purely peaceful purposes, but that's not the world we live in. And as the Ukraine war has shown, there is a need for intelligence gathering from cutting edge satellites. In fact, only on the news today, Daz, there was an item about a British company whose name conveniently has escaped my mind. Thank you very much, mind. But what they're doing, they've managed, using geolocation satellites, they've actually managed to eavesdrop on Russian military communications, which they found, much to their surprise and everybody's surprise, were not at all encrypted. And they've been listening to everything the Russian military have been saying to each other. It's a British company. And of course, the world intelligence organizations are right in there already. They're extremely interested in this. So they were talking to the CEO, and he's very young. He's probably only in his late 20s, early 30s, I would think. And I think he's just made himself a multimillionaire with that news item.
Exactly, and a target.
And a target, yes, of course. But, no pain, no gain. So, setting up a national space operations center to protect and secure satellites in space, because we do have things now like anti-satellite weapons. The Russians demonstrated that. The Indians demonstrated that. The Chinese have demonstrated that they can destroy satellites in space and thus provide a lot more space debris, of course. Thanks, guys. But there is a need to protect these satellites and to develop technology that can do it, as well as develop, cutting edge surveillance technologies, especially in the time of war like we are at the moment. Yeah. So,
and I bet some people's hearts skipped a beat when you mentioned Skynet.
Yeah,
if they've been watching Terminator, Skynet has been with us, has been a British surveillance system that we've had for many years, decades. And in fact, they're actually just developing the new structures for Skynet 6. So just give it a few years, and when it becomes self-aware, then we got to build ourselves bunkers, and we'll have Terminators running around everywhere.
Oh God, the thought of Arnold Schwarzenegger running everywhere is just too horrible to contemplate.
I'll be back.
Yeah, no, you won't, Arnold. You won't. You're getting too old for it, mate.
Hasta la vista, baby. Yeah, but it's not I've ever seen it. We've been again at the forefront of security programs. Is when we talk about defense, we're not going to be like Mr. Trump, who designed and started their Space Force, where he's going to send up lots of little Buzz Lightyears in a way, and they'll be zapping away everywhere and things like that.
I honestly sure that Trump thought it was that simple.
Exactly.
That was actually possible to do.
Little Buzz Lightyears flying around, shooting everything. But because one thing that Britain has never been interested in and never has put money into, not until just recently, is human space flight.
No.
But again, we can probably talk about that a bit later on.
Sure.
So we're not going to be putting people up into space with. Have you ever tried to fire a gun in space?
Personally, no, I haven't. No.
Yes, it's gonna mess your day up. Tell you.
Yes, it certainly is,
to say the least. Anyway, let's get on. We're rambling now. So yes, number 9. upskill and inspire our future space workforce.
Right.
We will partner with employers to help more young people gain access to work placements and apprenticeships in rewarding careers such as space engineering and space systems. Guided by the Space Skills Advisory Panel, we will work with the employers, training providers, and local partners to promote quality training in the skills required by the space sector. These include not only technical skills, but also the business management skills that help turn science and technology into commercial advantage. Finally, we will use the wonder of space to inspire the next generation into STEM careers, inviting space professionals to lead exciting activities and competitions in schools, from building satellites to designing space habitats. And
Right.
this is what I was talking about with the space centers, going out into the schools, into the colleges, into the universities, and basically bring the wonder of space and the opportunities that are now coming to Britain in space technologies. And it is so wide. Everybody when they think about space, they think about astronauts, or they think about the control centers and things like that. But there are so many avenues you can go down to, and some of them can be biological. They can be any form of science. I've always said that because we're astronomers, amateur astronomers, but astronomy is a gateway to all the sciences.
Absolutely.
Everything is required. So this is what this is talking about: upskilling, making sure everybody's got an access to and placements in apprenticeships and places like that. So,
well, this whole thing that we're talking about, this 10-point plan, it's not going to happen without a skilled workforce to deliver it, in a nutshell. So education is going to be really important for giving kids the right skills. Now, if they live near one of these space centers, then they're going to get a lot of assistance and a lot of advice. So, listeners, if you have any children that are considering a role in the space sector, a few years ago, they would have had to have gone abroad. But now with the burgeoning UK space industry, and as Daz said, the skills that are required are so varied. Virtually anybody who is of any scientific bent whatsoever will be able to find work in the UK space centre. I've got no doubt about that. So this is a very, very important point about educating youngsters so that they can, do the jobs of their dreams and end up working in the space sector, which never stands still, is always exciting, always innovating by its very nature. So this is great. Okay, so lastly then, point 10, use space to modernize and transform our transport system. Space technology will underpin the modernization and transformation of the UK transport system, providing enhanced connectivity and positioning services, ensuring safe and reliable operation and resilient infrastructure. We are supporting innovative public transport projects across the UK, made possible by space-enabled technologies, such as the TCABS project to build and trial a fleet of self-driving shuttles. We are also facilitating shared services for short journeys through GPS-enabled geofencing solutions, including national trials of environmentally friendly e-rental scooters. So this is interesting, but not altogether surprising. It's just another application of space technology. Once you've got the satellites, you can use them in so many different ways, as it says here. Have you seen the TCABS project?
Not at the moment. That's
right. Well, I saw just a brief bit about it. I think it was on the television, actually, on one channel. It's basically self-driving shuttles. They're like small buses. For transporting people around cities. Electrically, of course, are totally environmentally friendly, controlled by satellites. And, this is just one application of the way that you can use, because, space technology has been used for many years in the transport sector, with trains especially. trains, the modern train network relies a lot on GPS positioning. And so this is great that, it's going to be improved even further. Innovative public transport projects, as it says. So this is great.
Yeah. If they can get the trains to run on time, that'll be brilliant.
Well, I'm not sure even the advanced technology can solve that one, but there we are.
Yeah, you were talking about the T cabs. They were talking, because I live not far from Shrewsbury in Shropshire, and they were talking there of using a system because Shrewsbury is basically the main town centre. It is on top of a hill, like most market towns.
Yeah,
they were built there for defence. So to get to, well, of course, they put all the car parks around the outside of the town centre. So wherever you go, you've got to walk up a great hill.
yes.
So what they were talking about there a little while ago, that they were going to start these T cabs from running from the car parks up to the town centre, which I don't think it actually came to fruition. It's something that a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed youngster came up with. But yeah, I can understand what they're talking about now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be great. It's going to be really interesting. Okay, well, that's the 10-point plan. Before we go any further, there's just something that occurred to me that we really should mention about what the UK is up to in space. And that is, how many people in Britain realise that Britain is putting a rover on the moon this year?
Yes, exactly. Yes,
now, this is a rover developed by a British company called Spacebit. And I did approach them to take part in the program because I would love to talk to them about that, but unfortunately I didn't get a reply. So this is not just a rover on the moon. This is an innovative rover because it doesn't use wheels. It walks. It's got jointed limbs that will enable it to walk around the moon's surface. I mean, it's not a huge thing. It's a small little rover, but it is British. So Britain is actually putting a lunar rover on the moon this year as part of the NASA program for innovation in small companies or startup companies, which is going to deliver lots of new technology to the moon over the next couple of years. And Spacebit have taken advantage of this to build this incredible rover to explore the lunar surface, and that's meant to be launching later this year.
That's right. Yes, it's part of the Peregrine system.
Yes,
which will be delivering numerous rovers, experiment pods, lots of things to the moon, even people's ashes who wish to be placed on the moon. And as I said, it'll be traveling in this called a satellite type share thing. You get it with the satellites where people share a rocket and they put all their satellites in there. They're all launched. And but this is under the Peregrine program. And as Andy said, it's designed. The reason they use legs is they wanted to go places where wheeled vehicles cannot go.
Yes.
And they're talking about to explore on the moon surface things called rills, go into lava tunnels and things like that. So it's to go to places where no man has ever gone before.
It's fantastic, fantastic. But the fact that I haven't seen any mention of this in the mainstream media in the UK, none whatsoever, and people just don't realise that Britain's putting a rover, an innovative walking rover, on the moon this year as part of the NASA program. Yeah. So that's exciting.
I mean, David Bowie did sing about spiders on Mars, but we're talking about spiders on the moon.
Yeah, because it does look like a sort of a spider because it's got jointed limbs for walking. Incredible stuff. Okay, Daz, when we come back, I'll be talking to Matthew Archer, who is Launch Operations Director for the UK Space Agency, and the really interesting chat that I had with him. Well, I'm delighted to welcome to Astro Radio Matthew Archer, who's a Director of Spaceflight Operations at the UK Space Agency. Welcome to Astro Radio.
Thank you, Andy.
And so first of all, I'd just like to ask you, can you just sort of give us a brief overview of UK space operations and how the UK Space Agency fits into everything?
Yeah, I can. The UK Space Agency is playing a fundamental role in enabling launch operations from the UK. Back in 2017, when the programme was designed and created, we recognised the need to provide kind of the initial support to grow this new market in the UK. It's one that the UK hasn't had a domestic launch capability for a long time.
Yeah.
One that was, in recent years, as we've seen the commercial market grow and the opportunities there, we were keen to make sure that the UK was playing its part. Making sure that we had that inspirational drive at the centre of government to say, how do we enable innovation and commercial companies to set up in the UK? Very much looking forward to launch from later this year.
It's going to be an incredible year, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one that, it's hard to understate the amount of effort that has gone into getting this far. Like, the program's been in existence for kind of 4 years, and we've been doing lots of enabling activity to make launch possible. Ultimately the bit that people remember is when we get to launch day and you start to see those activities, and those inspiring moments are there for people to kind of observe and then live in kind of the memory of people for a long time. So yeah.
Absolutely, because I think I'm right in saying that the UK is the only country in the world that developed a satellite launching capability and then cancelled it again.
Yes, we are. Yeah, we do hold that title.
It's quite a distinction. And I remember going back to the 60s. You're obviously too young to remember this, but there was so much excitement. The 60s was the exciting era, wasn't it? Culminating in moon landings. But there was so much excitement that Britain had actually done something, that few countries have managed. And it's just a shame that the whole thing was cancelled. We're having to pick it up again, 50 or 60 years later. It's a real shame. So what sort of challenges have you come across in trying to establish the UK as a satellite launcher again?
To be honest, lots. It's kind of
oh dear.
I think in particular, I suppose the bit that people don't see is kind of, given the UK hasn't ever launched from UK soil, in essence, establishing the sort of regulations and legislation required has been a significant undertaking on behalf of the agency and others across government. And we were able to kind of get that through Parliament last year, which was a major success.
Yes,
one that for me is the start of us building capability, not just with commercial companies and building launch vehicles, but on the government side, making sure that we have appropriate regulations to make sure that activities are safe and undertaken with due kind of concern. I'd add to that, there are lots of other things that people probably don't think about. So things like international agreements, making sure that we have agreements with the US and Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, Norway, and making sure that we can launch rockets that either go near or through parts of their kind of international territories, and equally bringing technology across from the US. So again, lots of activity that government has had to do behind the scenes, and the Space Agency has been at the heart of driving that. So yeah, really proud moments getting this far, but very much looking forward to the future.
It sounds a bit of a legal nightmare trying to sort out all that spaghetti.
Yeah, and this is a hard activity. So the phrase and kind of it's very corny, but it is rocket science. It is.
Yes, of course.
And it's one where, for us as government, we have to make sure that we're protecting the interests of individuals and their safety, which you'd expect would be paramount. But also building a flexible and sort of world-leading regulatory regime that says the UK is open for business and intends to be a leading sort of provider of small satellite launch. And that's the key driver for us, is not just getting kind of 3 or 4 launches away, but building an industry that will be sustainable for years to come and makes us the leading provider of launch in Europe.
Right. And I know there are all sorts of weird things as well. My co-presenter on Astro Radio, Daz, who I'm producing this program with, he was telling me that there was even an old law that forbids the testing of liquid-fueled rockets on British soil. So all these archaic things that you'd think would have been put to bed a long time ago. But
and it comes down to kind of where we've been and sensible regulations over time, and then actually just not thinking about how we're going to create kind of the right market for launch. So we've had to go through those in detail and say, what's the right framework? How do we regulate it?
Yeah.
Create a regulator in the UK. So traditionally it was the agency. Obviously, I think people can see the conflict if the agency was both promoting launch and being its regulator. So as part of setting up the CAA as the independent regulator was giving that transparency of we've got somebody who can independently assess the safety case, whether or not meeting its environmental targets and objectives, and lots of other things. So again,
right.
a place to be in.
Right. Given this sort of, if you like, renaissance of British space efforts, I mean, do you think there's been any one thing that has triggered that, or has it been a slowly accumulating thing? Because it all seems to have happened rather rapidly. Just a few years ago, you didn't really hear about British space efforts apart from, the people in Surrey manufacturing satellites and things. And now it's sort of, excuse the pun, really taken off. What do you think's behind that?
I think in part it's an increasing recognition of the importance, not just of kind of human spaceflight activities, which, as you say, was a kind of golden era in the 60s, but that sense of over the recent sort of decade, you've seen space being utilised much more as a commercial service, and actually people have started to be aware of what space brings to their lives.
Yeah,
and government's been better at kind of articulating that. Say, most times when you get your phone out your pocket, it's giving you navigation information or it's giving you communication information using space services. And for us, there's been a real shift in the UK from one which has been probably a government-driven effort in many respects to one which says there is a strong commercial opportunity in a number of fields that either use or rely on space technologies. And that's really driven growth. So we know that the UK market is growing at about 6 to 7% a year and has done for a while.
Wow, that would be a phenomenal growth in any industry, wouldn't it?
Well, and this is it. And this is why for government, it's one that we're keen to continue investing in, to say, look, we can create hundreds, if not thousands, of highly skilled jobs right across the UK. And for me, that's kind of connecting with more and more with both where politicians want to kind of see renaissance of different industries and kind of say, well, actually, how can we use those skills in different ways? But equally just giving other people the opportunity and other communities the opportunity to benefit from launch. So whereas normally things are based in the southeast, launch inevitably is best located on the coastline, often in very remote areas. So it has the opportunity to benefit local communities in a very different way to other kind of investment projects.
Absolutely. And it's quite amazing. You see people criticizing on social media and other places, really having a go at spending money on space, and the money should be put to better purposes, without realizing how much of their daily lives now is directly or indirectly affected by what we do in space. And that is a perception that a lot of people have. How can we get the message across to people better, do you think, that it benefits them and it benefits their jobs and their lives and everything else? Because as I was saying to you, I think that the mainstream UK media up until recently seem to be completely ignoring what's going on with UK space. And how can we get the message across to people?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and one that we as the agency have been quite careful to kind of say, look, part of our role as government is education and awareness of what's achievable with space. And I think things like COP26 were a great example of how we can, if you like, lead kind of activities across the world and say, look, launch has a fantastic opportunity in enabling us to see the world from a very different perspective.
Sure.
We wouldn't be able to monitor climate change with anywhere near the effectiveness we'd need to if we didn't have launch and the ability to use Earth observation satellites. And the same is true for rural communities who use satellite-based broadband. Ultimately, we wouldn't be able to connect many people in rural parts of the world with that technology. And I think just selling those stories and being able to communicate them to not just to kind of adults like you and I, but actually to children, to get them used to that environment and that they have that baseline knowledge to say, here is what space can do for us. That's a very important point, and that's why we're using a number of competitions within the agency to highlight the benefits that space can bring.
Yes,
the primary school students and those kind of further up the kind of educational chain to say, well, how can we make the most of space and, if you like, communicate the benefits and bring those to communities right across the UK?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think it's, we need to reach out to the youngsters and not just tell them about the whiz bang technology, but explain to them how it's making a difference in their lives and how it's going to make an increasing difference in the future. Because by the time these children are, adults, their lives will have been revolutionized by technology, and especially space technology.
And just to add to some of that, I think it's really important that whenever we have people involved in the space sector or have the knowledge of the space sector, to go out and do that outreach. Like we know, this year people have been fantastic. So we know that those involved in the sector have been able to kind of go out and kind of broadcast that message to nearly 1 million people. And we know that we'll achieve that target by the end of the year. And we want to go further. I know, as you said, that energy and enthusiasm, if you could just bottle that and kind of give it to everyone else, it's great. That's why we love things like our, and I'll just mention our logo liftoff competition for primary school children.
Oh, yes.
It's a really great thing that builds off the fact that space is now part of their curriculum. And so they will touch on it at sort of primary school. But it allows them to really simply design a logo that we're hoping to put on the early launches in the UK. Yeah. And it just gives them that sense of, how do I think about space? What does it do for me? What does it do for my family or friends or different industries? And it just encourages them to think about how we use space. Right. Really great competition. I'm pleased that we've already got over 2,000 entries with 2 or 3 weeks still to go before the deadline.
Oh, fun! And how can youngsters find out about this? Where can they go?
So logoliftoff.org is the website. You can find it on the UK Space Agency homepage or on social media at Launch UK. Again, you'll be able to find any information related to that competition. So do find that out. It's great.
Well, that sounds marvellous. And just to finish today, Matthew, because I know you're a busy man, can you give us a sort of a brief rundown of what's coming up this year with UK Space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key highlight for me will be looking to kind of finish our logo competition in the coming months alongside the designs of the nanosat, which I'm hoping will launch from the UK in the near future. But the main event is going to be this summer, when I'm hoping that Virgin will be lifting off from Cornwall, carrying a number of UK satellites. And again, will be a very big moment for UK launch and signal the fact that the UK is now a launch-faring nation. And hopefully, I'm expecting kind of launches to happen either kind of late this year or very early next year, that will start to see a more regular drumbeat of launches across the UK, in particular from Scotland. So it'll be our first vertical launch at that stage.
That sounds amazing. That sounds amazing.
It will be.
And the whole thing of UK spaceports clearing the regulatory hurdles,
yeah,
and going full steam ahead. I mean, if you told me a few years ago there would have been a spaceport in Cornwall, it would have seen an outlet. But
that's it. And that's part of the innovation that we want to encourage, is to say, whether it's companies like B2 Space, who are looking at ideas of using effectively a giant balloon to then launch a rocket from.
Yes, I saw that. That's
high altitude. Again, amazing concepts, and we'll continue to kind of support innovation across the UK that builds that longer term launch market. So yeah, a very active and competitive space.
And also, of course, building on Britain's great tradition of world-class engineering and innovation.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, Matthew, well, thank you so much for your time. Very kind of you. May I just wish you all the best with your activities.
Thanks, Andy.
Of course, we glued. And we hope for some point you can come back onto Astro Radio and update us about what's going on, if you'd like to do that.
Absolutely, Andy. Anytime.
All right. All right, thank you so much, Matthew. Now, to look at the UK space programme from the point of view of a private company, we spoke to Paul Williams of Black Arrow Space Technologies. Well, we're delighted to welcome back to Astro Radio Mr. Paul Williams of Black Arrow Space Technologies. How are you, Paul?
Very good, Andy. Thank you. Thank you.
Good to have you back with us again. It's quite a while since we've talked to you, and I'm sure you've been making some progress with Black Arrow. But for the benefit of our listeners who didn't listen to your last appearance on Astro Radio, and these people actually do exist, believe it or not, could you tell us a little bit, first of all, about Black Arrow, what you're trying to achieve and what the plan is generally?
Yes, so Black Arrow is a unique offering in the UK space sector. We plan to design and build our own launch vehicles in southern England, and then take them over the border into South Wales and load them up and integrate them into a seaborne launch facility based in Port Talbot, and then take it out to the Eastern Atlantic and launch from there. So this concept has been proven by a company called Sea Launch way back in the mid-90s.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So we know that all of this works. They were a bigger scale, so we know that this works. But we're not being quite as clever as Sea Launch were. We're not having bespoke vessels or anything hugely expensive. We're converting a dry bulk carrier to take our launch pad and workshops and propellant storage and accommodation for crew and all of the others on one vessel. Right. And then we'll have a support vessel coming with us, which is a fast oil and gas support type vessel, which will have the local range on it, the local flight control center in it.
Right.
So we'll be a fairly self-sufficient fleet. We call it a space fleet. We're not supposed to call it a spaceport, you see, because of the regulations that came out last year. So we call it a space fleet. I was going to call it a star fleet, but I thought that was probably a little too much.
That would have been wonderful.
So we, in doing what I've just said, we will become the only end-to-end new space ecosystem in Europe. And that means taking it from materials and propellant production all the way through launch vehicle design and integration, through to the spaceport, through to the implementation of the launch service. So at every interface you can think of, you have the same consistency with standards, with safety protocols, and with security. Of course, cybersecurity is hugely in the news these days, but it's very important for our particular development because of the nature of the beast. So we have to make sure, there's an adage that says the interfaces of any system are the weak points. That's where things go wrong. And if you can control the interfaces, then you have a strong chain.
Sure.
So we're following that.
Excellent. So how did Black Arrow get started then as an idea?
This manifestation of Black Arrow.
This manifestation.
So Black Arrow, just to cover that, Black Arrow, of course, is a name that goes back to the late 60s, early 70s in the UK as a government funded small satellite launcher that was reasonably successful. It flew last in October 1971 with the Prospero satellite launching from Woomera, and that made the UK the sixth nation on Earth to launch its own indigenous satellite on its own launcher.
Wow.
So we were in the Space Launch Club, but then just prior to that launch from Australia, the UK government backed out and cancelled the whole program. If you go to the Science Museum, then the R4 model of Black Arrow, along with the flight spare of the Prospero satellite, which was launched October 28th, 1971, are on display there with a lot more information than I could give you.
Yeah, I've seen them. They look fantastic.
Yeah. So Black Arrow is a name that is synonymous with successful UK launch activities. Of course, the UK has been in space in the satellites and in instruments and sensors and God knows what else since the 50s. So we've got a very long heritage in that area, in the space field in the UK. But for launch, we handed everything over more or less at the end of the Blue Streak and Black Arrow programs, and they went on to assist with Europa and eventually the Ariane family. They've kind of gone away from that now, but the technologies that were developed in those days stayed within Europe in the Ariane family for many years. So Black Arrow for us was a shoe-in. You know, it's a name that everybody goes weepy-eyed about. You know, oh, how we gave it all away and all that. But Black Arrow is a name that conjures up success, space, kind of. I mean, it was never in the public domain back in those days. It was always government funded. It was government contract. You were lucky if you worked for it, and I've been privileged to know a number of people who worked on that program, long retired, and some have passed on now. But they have passed a great deal of passion and enthusiasm and bonhomie about those days on to me and a lot of others. And I think it's a worthwhile thing to do in their memory and you know, for just to keep the name of Black Arrow going. So we picked on Black Arrow. There was another reason, of course, that Black Arrow Space Technologies shortens quite nicely to BLAST, which we've taken on as a moniker.
Yeah. Of course, you know, there is a lot of nostalgia for those days. And, you know, Britain has the ignominious distinction of being the only nation in the world to have developed a satellite launcher and then cancelled it again. So, you know, I know there's a lot, and anybody over a certain age who's ever taken any interest in space, you're right, the name Black Arrow immediately conjures up those sort of golden days of British rocketry. But
things have moved on since then. You know, we are now much more capable. We're much more confident in the global technology markets. And we have a brilliant technological and innovative ground in the UK. You know, most of the Formula One racing teams are here in the UK, you know, in Brackley and in Silverstone and in Wantage just up the road from here. So what we don't know about composites, about rapid development, about fuels, about turning these things into a successful product very quickly, is well within the UK's gift. You know, we have a lot of very smart people in aerospace, in space, Formula One, as I've just said, but also in maritime, which fits in with us.
Sure. And
the UK, I think, as the rest of the space sector growth in the country is showing, the UK is a very good place to do space business now, not just with satellites, but with launch vehicles and all the support paraphernalia along with it.
Right. Daz, did you want to ask Paul anything?
Well, Paul was, as you said, nostalgia, thinking of Blue Streak and Black Arrow, Black Prince, and all those rockets. As you said, they didn't completely just disappear off the face of the earth. They went into the Europa. But as you were saying, as regards technology, since then, and it's one of the things, I don't know if you find it frustrating, so we don't tend to blow our own trumpet too much. But we have been at the forefront ever since in satellite design, communications, building parts for them, instruments, right from the year dot. Of course, the first British satellite to go up was Ariel, which unfortunately the Americans managed to bring to a premature end. Along with Telstar, unfortunately, due to setting off a atomic bomb at high altitude. So yes, they didn't realise what they were doing. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
So it didn't kill Ariel entirely.
No, not entirely. No, it carried on working.
Ariel 1 brought back a lot of important information on solar radiation and Earth interaction in orbit. So. And it finally decayed in 1976, I believe. It came down in 76. So it was launched in 62.
Yeah, 62.
And it went for 14 years, which I don't think was too bad in those days. Okay,
No,
it wasn't
no.
operational for all that time, but the American program, Starfish Prime.
Yes, that's
That's
the one,
right.
Starfish Prime.
You've got it. You've got it. But
What
of course,
a
we
mistake of the
did
maker.
develop more because, like I said, the day after the actual test of the atomic bomb, they sent up Telstar, which was the first, which again was another British design satellite,
And a number one single, I believe.
Yes, it was absolutely
was.
fantastic.
Mine
I
was
can
the
still remember it now.
tornadoes, yeah.
We should have it playing in the background now. But
No, not again. Peaky
Yeah.
playing all the time.
The first satellite to actually have television signal transmitted across the Atlantic, absolutely fantastic, and it was picked up at Goon Hilly, which again is still going. But we have, yes, we have. We've had ever since. We've sort of like everything's gone quiet. You don't hear about our successes, but ever since then, we've been at the forefront in cutting edge of all the satellite stuff and all that, especially with the ESA and people like that, and other space communities around the world.
Yeah.
But you don't hear about it. And I mean, of course, the latest one was the James Webb. We've got a big instrument on there, one of the main instruments. But you don't hear about it. So
all I would say is, going back to Formula One parlance, Mercedes and Red Bull don't do a lot of shouting about what they do. They just get on the track and do it.
Yeah, sure.
And that's the way it should be. It annoys me, to be honest, people who get all over social media saying, yeah, we've done this and we've banged this out of a bit of stainless steel and we've done that and we've done that. And it's almost daily. It's like a Chinese water torture of things which Elon's done today.
That's right.
A good quality product or a good quality service sells itself, and who's he trying to sell it to? That's the crazy thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of Black Arrow itself, can you tell us a little bit about the launch vehicle, Paul? What sort of payload it can carry, and who you think your customers are going to be for it?
I can tell you what I know. It's it's designed to be a 500 kilo lift.
500. That's
yeah. So the licensing limits for the UK is 500 kilos within what they call the MTCR Cat 1 regulations, missile technology control regime regulations.
Right.
And 500 kilos is where the UK Space Agency has put the limit for payloads.
Right. I didn't know there was a limit. That's interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a good limit.
It makes sense.
It's a good limit, because if you can launch 500 kilos and you can prove you can launch 500 kilos, then you should be allowed to get bigger. But you have to prove yourself at a lower end.
Yes.
So at 500 kilos, and this is where most of the current crop of new space small satellite launchers are situated. There is our aerospace in Germany are doing the same thing. You mentioned Skyroar and Orbex. They're heading for this similar sorts of lift. And Rocket Labs, of course, went for 380 or 400, something like that, on their electrons. So it's in the right ballpark. And what advantage we have is that we won't need to do a dogleg. So we have a 500 kilo capability to lift, and all of that 500 kilos can get to orbit. We don't need to do any deviations to not fly over people or not fly over countries or not fly over national infrastructure, or things like this. So when we position ourselves in the Eastern Atlantic, we'll have a direct line of sight to orbit for 90-degree polar and 98-degree sun synchronous. If we're really clever and we design the ship properly, then there's a possibility of having 2 or 3 or even 4 launches from the same campaign, and all we need to do is turn the ship slightly to head them on their way.
That's a great idea.
Very nice. Yeah, very nice.
Fantastic.
The land-based sites can't do that, of course. They have to process one at a time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it's the innovation of the fact that you'll actually be taken away from land and out to sea. And of course, sometimes you could probably chase the weather as well.
Yeah, indeed. It gives us the ability to sail through any system that's coming in, so that we get to the clear skies behind right at the right time. But it also allows us to avoid systems entirely and launch out of the Eastern Atlantic around Madeira, for example. We could go, as far as we need to go. We need to look at the costs involved with doing that, but certainly from a concept point of view, there's advantages to be had there. The biggest advantage that going out to sea brings is the almost negligible level of risk. We're not overflying people. We're not going anywhere near land. We're not polluting. We're not doing anything. We're just doing what we do. And as long as we look after our own people by getting them off the ship during hazardous operations, then there's no risk at all to anyone.
But I presume there must be some sort of maritime regulations for those sorts of things.
Well, there are, but only from a point of view of registration of the vessel for seaworthiness. As long as it's proven to be seaworthy, then there's nothing to stop you doing that kind of activity. It's the same as trawling for fish.
Right. So there's nothing actually in the maritime regulations that says you can't launch rockets from sea.
Not that we're currently aware of, and we've been speaking to the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. We've been speaking to the CAA. We've been speaking to all of the agencies, and all of them who have expressed a preference have told us that there is no issue.
That's brilliant. So you've got it's clear for you then, and as the only people doing this, it must feel wonderful to be the first doing this, eh?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Like with most things, I struggle to understand why nobody's done it before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
well, I mean, but having said that, of course, Sea Launch did do it before, but
for a while, yeah,
in a bigger scale.
But of course, also by taking it out to sea, you're not having to cause any damage to the countryside or building infrastructures or launch pads as well. So
that's great.
It's got to be a bonus there, so you're not causing economic damage to the land or anything like that, digging holes and
so the only thing I can say is that the reason that we went for a converted dry bulk carrier is that they fit into any dockside in any harbour infrastructure that of scale. So we could do this operation out of Bristol. We could do it out of Cork. We could do it out of, I don't know, Monterey, wherever that is. We could do it. We could do it from anywhere.
Yeah.
I remember when the A380 was brought on stream, there was a number of airports around the world that had to reconstruct all of their ramps to fit the 380. There's none of that with our operation. We fit into docks. We operate the same in any dock with the infrastructure that you would have for any dry bulk carrier.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Really sounds like a win-win situation, Paul. It's a unique concept. It sounds absolutely wonderful. Just on generally, I don't know whether you can answer this, but I think Daz and I have talked about this, that Britain in space seems to be accelerating over the last couple of years. Like there's sort of been a complete rebirth or expansion, should I say, of the British space industry. I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that. But is it that the government are waking up to how important the industry is because it's now bringing in latest figures we could find was 16 billion a year to the economy? I mean, is it purely a financial thing or what is it?
I've been in this game now for 37 years this year in the space business.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Throughout that time, I've seen success right at the very beginning. We had an Olympus program back in the mid-80s. There was a massive success. It went up into geostationary orbit and beamed Italia 90 back to Earth. So it was one of the biggest telecommunications. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that it was the biggest geostationary satellite that was launched at that particular time.
Really?
It was 5.5 tons or 6 tons or something like this, and it was only bettered about 3 weeks later by Intelsat 6. But for that short period of time, it was the biggest geostationary satellite, and it was a British team that launched it from French Guiana, of which I was proud to be one of them, and it was a great time in the industry. And then something happened, and we started losing contracts all over the place, and eventually British Aerospace, who I was with then, folded into Matra Marconi, and it all became Astrium and Airbus, and now Ariane Group. 2002, I believe it was, that Lord Sainsbury, who was the science minister at the time, was the first, if I recall correctly, to moot Britain getting back into the space industry in a big way. And that was where the belief started to feel back in. 2014, there was a space innovation and growth strategy brought out. 2015, of course, Tim Peake was fired off to the space station. And then from then on, things started to snowball in the slowest sense of the word. The UK Space Agency brought out a lot of money, the calls for spaceports and things like this in 2016, 17, all of which went to foreign suppliers, and a few fields in Scotland. And then 2018, the space industry regulations came out. 2021, the Space Industry Act came out in 2018. 2021, the regulations came out, and it has been pretty rapid. You know, you have to say that. And now we've got a national space policy, which I think is a bit of a toothless tiger because there's no money attached to it. So we'll see. You know, I'm hoping that more funding is being made available to develop British operators, British launch vehicle designers and manufacturers like ourselves. We haven't received a penny yet from the space agency for all that we've achieved.
Well, of course, you're talking about money. Well, isn't the UK Space Agency based in the same town as you are, in Swindon? Can you go around and knock on the door?
Can you see the marks here? I've been knocking on the door for 5 years.
Yeah. So as you said, the money is dropping there, and I did notice that the 15 companies that they supported a couple of weeks ago, 11 were for satellite detection, for satellite monitoring, and for debris retrieval. They seem to be putting all their money into one basket at the moment.
Yeah, there's not much money either.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't
50,000 each or something.
Yeah, it was small beer compared to what other countries are doing.
But that's that's exactly the point. You know, and I've mentioned this on a couple of different programs to different places, that when we're talking about the Wales space strategy, if you consider that England and Scotland have been pouring whatever funds they have in to support whatever they want to do in space, whether it's in Cornwall or Harwell or north of Scotland or Prestwick or wherever. Wales is very far behind the curve. You know, they've known about this for the same amount of time and done absolutely nothing with it. So now this strategy's out, hopefully we'll get some momentum behind getting. And it shocked me, the statistic came out that 1% of people in the UK working in the space industry are in Wales.
1%? Is that all?
That's absolutely extraordinary.
Blimey, it is.
And that really is a reflection of how far behind the curve Wales is. When you consider what Wales has, you know, I could run through them if you have a minute.
We have actually less than a minute on our allotted time.
So if you take Aberporth, if you take Port Talbot, if you take Cardiff, Newport, Swansea, Aberystwyth, which is a huge data centre, and Wrexham, how can only 1% be working in the space industry.
And on that question, we'll have to leave it, I'm afraid. Thank you, Paul, so much for coming on the program.
Yes, thank you very much.
And we'd love to have you back at some point so you can keep us up to date with Black Arrow.
I'd be more than happy to do that.
Lovely. All right. Well, good luck with everything, Paul.
Thanks.
Yes.
We're following it with keen interest.
Great stuff.
So, and thanks again.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Well, we'd like to thank Paul Williams very much for coming on the program and speaking to us. Thanks a lot, Paul. Very kind of you. Right, Daz. So where does that leave us? So I guess what a lot of people would like to know is where are these rockets going to be taking off from? Where can they go to see the launch? Because, you know, people in the UK getting to witness a space launch in their own country will be quite exciting, I think. So you've been looking at the various spaceports that the government is setting up or wants to set up around the country. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yes, well, basically we have 7 spaceports planned. Now, if you want to see a rocket launch, you'll have to go to Scotland. Because all the vertical.
We're going to Scotland, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you cross the border, you might need your passport soon, anyway. But that's by the by. But all the vertical, the rockets that are going to go straight up into the sky, are all going to be launched from the northern hemisphere. You'll notice that the northern part of the UK.
Right.
You'll notice that all the spaceports are in the north and down the west side of the coast.
Okay.
Now, there is a reason for this, and I think Matthew touched on it in your interview with him.
Yes,
and that's a case of the airspace that they have to fly through.
Hmm.
If they did them on the eastern side, then they will encroach on more countries' airspace, and that means you have to get more permissions and more documentary. It's a lot more hassle and stuff like that, and you don't want to be overflying high population areas with these rockets, just in case something does go wrong. As Andy said this at the beginning, we are looking at least 2 launches this year, one vertical and one horizontal. And I'll start basically with the furthest north we're going to have a spaceport, and that is in the Shetland Space Centre. Now, that's what it's been called up until now, but just recently it's been changed to the Saxford.
Has it really?
Spaceport, yes, the Saxford Spaceport. And from there, it's located at Lamberness, Unst, in the Shetland Isles, and it will be doing vertical launches, which will be orbital and suborbital.
Right.
With orbital inclinations of sun-synchronous and polar orbits, which is what a lot of people are going for now, and they require.
Absolutely.
They're looking at companies like the UK Pathfinder launch, Lockheed Martin, and ABL Space Systems, and also Skyora. They will be launching from this site. Next in line, we have the Space Hub Sunderland. Now, again, we were talking about the space hubs. This is going to be a conglomeration of industries that are going to be working all around that area. But it's also been turned into a spaceport. And it's, here we go, Armoine Peninsula, Sutherland, Scotland. Mm-hmm. Again, it's vertical launch. Again, polar and sun synchronous orbits. And you're looking at Orbex Prime. They're the company that are expecting. They've applied for their license for launch, and they will be launching from Sutherland. I don't know whether they've been issued with the license yet. I'm not sure. It may have been granted. And again, going back, so they will be launching from Sunderland. They are a Scottish-based company. Then you've got Spaceport 1, which is from Skulpag Farm, North Uist, Outer Hebrides, Scotland. Again, it's vertical, and it's orbital and suborbital launches. Again, sun synchronous and polar orbits, north and south initial trajectories, so they can go either way.
Right.
And planned departures, they're in negotiation for launch providers at the moment. and they hope to be running by 2022, sometime this year as well. They were hoping to actually launch last year, but of course, things have got to go through the licensing and everything, and that's to be able to launch and build the infrastructure as well. Then we've got, now this is another one, Spaceport Machrihanish, which is located in Campbelltown, Argyll, Scotland. Again, it's a horizontal. This is a horizontal, but it's also. I did notice in a later newscast that it's going to be horizontal and vertical. So it'll be launching from a suspended platform of some sort. It could be a plane, could be a balloon, or something like that, to high altitude, or they'll be just doing vertical launches as well. Now, I do believe that in 2021 they did actually fire a sounding rocket from that facility.
Yes, I think you're right. I think I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So again, it's sun synchronous and polar orbits, and again, it's in negotiation with providers. Then we have Prestwick Spaceport. Now we all know Prestwick's airport in Scotland, and it's Prestwick, South Ayrshire, Scotland. This will be horizontal, orbital, and suborbital, sun synchronous, polar orbit, and it says here a Molniya and other inclinations, north and south.
Right.
Now I'm not sure what that is. It's something I'm going to have to look up. Planned departures, again, they're in negotiation. Now they hope to be operational by 2022. But also they are looking at orbital flights to begin in 2023. Then we have, so I'm working my way down the map slowly.
We've also got Spaceport Snowdonia.
Snowdonia, that's right. And it's Llanbera,
Gwynedd,
Wales.
Yes.
And it's, again, that's a horizontal one. Now, this is what they're looking at. Again, it's sun synchronous and polar and suborbital launches. It's looking at launching research, multiple, including research, development, and test and evaluation. Now, these will definitely be launching from a balloon, and it's B2 Space. It will be running.
Yes, they've partnered with B2 Space at Spaceport Snowdonia. That's
right. But also, and then I would just mention the last one, which is Spaceport Cornwall. I think I've got them all.
Yeah.
And this is at Newquay. We're getting a definite launch in this in the summer.
Yes.
And it's, as we said, Newquay, Cornwall. This is a horizontal launch system. And again, it's sun synchronous and polar orbits. And they will be used in the Virgin Orbit Launcher 1 rocket, which will be launched by Cosmic Girl, the 747, which has been designed to launch these systems.
Yeah.
And as I said, that will be summer or spring this year. And they're also building a big space center there, which is going to cost well, they've actually started to build it, £5.6 million. Now, with these, the ones I'm talking about, the vertical, the horizontal launches, now these are all based at airports, small airports.
Yes, that's right. The Cornwall one, for example, is based at Newquay Airport. Now, I'd always, for whatever reason, I've always pictured Newquay as being quite a small airport. But in fact, they won't even need to extend the runway to take the Cosmic Girl 747.
The 747, exactly.
No, so
it's long enough and it's wide enough to already be used. And this is why, as of this, we're getting this launch hopefully in the summer. But of course, all the vertical launches will be taken out to sea or high altitude. You're not going to be able to see a lot. So if you want to watch a launch, head north into the Scotland, and hopefully they'll provide places where you can actually watch these launches. And as I said, the first launch I do believe is Saxiford, and again that will be Orbex.
Yes.
Sorry, no, is it? If it's Orbex, it'll be Sutherland, won't it? Sorry, I do mean getting. I'll have to check on
if
that.
It's yes, Orbex is Sutherland.
Yeah, so if it's Orbex as the first launch, because also there's another company, Sky Aura, that I did mention They were hoping to launch again this year, and they are definitely at the Saxford spaceport. But of course, with what's happened in the world, they may have some complications with that, because a lot of their components do come from the Ukraine. So we would have had 3 launches for definite, but now it may be only 2. We will see.
Indeed. And we did approach both Skyroar and Orbex to take part in the program, but I guess they're busy with more pressing concerns at the moment.
Yes,
so there we are. Right. Well, that's the spaceport, and even just a few years ago, I would have been absolutely stunned. That's no exaggeration to learn that the UK is busy building spaceports and is poised on the edge of becoming a major player in the space industry. And as I chatted about with both Paul and Matthew, there are reasons for that, and it's all to do with, of course, international competitiveness and Britain trying to update its technology, its workforce skills, and to capture international markets. And it's absolutely thrilling to see. You and I, Daz, we grew up with Thunderbirds, so all this is, it's been a long time coming. But finally, Britain has woken up to the fact that literally the sky is the limit with the space industry. And,
exactly.
And
I mean, as I said before at the very beginning of the show, it's a shame that they haven't been able to put something onto the Isle of Wight, because that's where the old the Black Arrows and the Blue Streaks their engines were all tested. So
that's right.
But,
I believe you can still go there and see some of the old.
Some of the old buildings are there. It's called High Down. It's called High Down. The place was on the Isle of Wight. It's literally on the cliff edges.
I always felt sorry for those skilled rocketeers, who put so much of their careers into, developing a satellite capability for Britain, only to see the government of the day say, no, that's costing too much money, we better cancel that. Yeah. But of course, they were under pressure from the Americans as well to do that.
That's right. But unfortunately, and I think I did mention it before, that our system or launch systems were far superior and a lot cheaper than what NASA was producing at the time.
Yes.
Political pressure and funding, they decided to go with the American systems. It's a shame, but c'est la vie. That's what.
That's all history now.
Yeah, and then like I said, we're talking about spaceports, and then we mustn't forget Paul, who'll be launching from sea. So.
Absolutely, yes. Let's not forget Black Arrow Space Technologies. Because they have a novel and innovative and probably world-beating approach to launching from the converted bulk carrier at sea. So there we are. All this is happening soon. So let's just very briefly, for our listeners, just list the things that are coming up in the very near future. We've got the launch of the Launcher 1 rocket from Cornwall this year on the Cosmic Girl Virgin 747 from Virgin Orbit. And we've got, as we said, at least 1, possibly 2 launches from Scotland. Yes.
Yeah, we got the Orbex launch from Sutherland.
Yeah.
Which they're ploughing ahead with. There's lots of work going on at all the other spaceports, putting in the infrastructure, putting in their launch pads, and making sure they've got everything that they need for safety and also the environment. We've got to remember that all these places have got to be environmentally assessed.
Absolutely.
And the one in Snowdonia, that's been given permission to go ahead now.
Oh, good.
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 And so they've just been given the go ahead, and also Saxford have been given permission to actually start building their launch pads. Well, they'll be knocking those up because and also Orbex have been moving heavy structures into place for their test beds, because I think Mechanish is also going to be used as their test bed.
Right.
For their rockets, but they'll be launching from Sutherland. So they've been moving some really big pieces of kit backwards and forwards, getting ready for launch.
And also, of course, we've got, let's not forget, the British Lunar rover landing on the moon later this year as part of the on the Peregrine launcher. That's going to be really interesting. I can't remember if there's a fixed launch date for that yet.
No, it keeps varying and slipping.
Yeah,
I'm not even sure what system, because again, with the politics of the world at the moment and the way things have gone, I can't remember what system it's going to be launched on. And of course, they may not have any engines for it, so I'm not sure.
No, that's right. So if all goes well, Britain will be putting a rover on the moon this year.
Yeah.
And it has a Japanese name because there's partly a Japanese company behind this. I can't remember the name, but it's a weird Japanese name, the rover. But not to worry, just look out for that British rover. Let's hope that at least some of this makes the headlines in the dailies, because up until now they've completely ignored the British space program, more or less. So it's about time that people started to learn about what's happening, because it's all very exciting stuff. And at long last, the British space program is rising from the ashes of Blue Streak and Black Arrow.
Yeah, I mean, all these names have also been revitalized by these companies, like you say, Black Arrow. Sky Aura have got the Skylark, which was the British sounding rocket that had very
famous sounding rocket.
Had decades and decades of service, and it wasn't that long that it actually went out of service.
That's right.
And there's other names that have been brought back. So yeah, it's really, really nice to see. So it's a nod to the heritage of the old British space industry,
British space program.
Although
we should honour, as I said, the guys who worked on the original British space program.
Yeah,
because they were geniuses and they achieved things in engineering that no other country was really doing at the time. So there we are. Okay, well, let's wrap things up. Any final thoughts, Daz, before we...
I was just thinking that, of course, when we were doing the Black Arrows and all that, we did all our launches from major launches from Australia. So it would be nice to actually build something on this island and actually launch it from this island. So we won't have to move it all the way across to Woomera. Was it Woomera?
Woomera,
which was actually a town built specifically for that.
For the rocket.
For the launcher, yes. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, it's still the buildings are all derelict now, but the area is still used. I think it's an American listening station now. I hope I'm not letting any secrets out. So,
no, I don't think you are. I think that's fairly. I think that's in the public domain. And of course, lastly, the great thing is that Britain will become the first country in Europe to launch satellites from their own soil.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the European Space Agency launches from Kourou in French Guiana in South America, and Britain will become the first European country to launch satellites.
Yes. And of course, so
the soil, which is quite a distinction. Than some
because the Europeans, like a lot of them, are in trouble again due to the politics, because they can't launch from French Guiana using Soyuz rockets anymore.
No, that's right.
It's
what I said earlier. There will be new alliances and shifting alliances and a reassessment of the whole thing. But let's get this awful Ukraine war out of the way first, and let's
also with them. Yeah,
let's stop people being murdered.
Yeah.
Okay, then. Well, thank you very much for listening, listeners. We do hope you've enjoyed this look into the UK space program, Space Britannia.